Stop right there. You're not ready for that weight. The voice cracked across the gym floor like a whistle, sharp enough to turn heads, loud enough to freeze movement mid-rep, and for a split second, every clink of iron and hum of treadmills seemed to pause just to listen. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Marcus Ellington. He didn't flinch, not when the trainer said it, not when a couple of people nearby chuckled under their breath, not even when the man stepped closer, arms crossed, wearing that confident smirk reserved for people who thought they understood someone in under 5 seconds. Marcus stood in front of the squat rack, hands still resting lightly on the bar, dressed in a plain black t-shirt, gray sweatpants, and worn white sneakers that had seen more miles than most people in the room would guess. No brand logos, no headphones around his neck, no gym bag with a designer label. Just quiet, intentional quiet. The trainer shook his head, stepping in like he owned not just the space, but the air around it. "You're gonna hurt yourself," he added, louder this time, making sure the words carried beyond just Marcus. "This section's for advanced members." A few glances turned into stares. A guy by the dumbbell rack leaned over to his friend, whispering something with a grin. A woman on the elliptical slowed her pace just enough to watch without being obvious. The room didn't stop, but it shifted. It always did. Marcus lifted his eyes to the mirror in front of him, not to admire, not to check form, but to observe. He'd seen this look before. Not the exact face, not this exact gym, but the same tone, the same assumption, the same quiet judgment dressed up as concern. 20 years ago, it was a college weight room assistant who told him he might be more comfortable in the rec center. 15 years ago, it was a private club receptionist who asked if he was delivering equipment. Different places, same script. He adjusted his grip slightly on the bar, slow, deliberate, like none of it had touched him. The trainer let out a short laugh, turning halfway toward the others as if inviting them into the moment. "Man, I'm serious," he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound like advice, but still loud enough to perform. "You gotta work your way up. This isn't for beginners." Marcus finally turned his head. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to meet the trainer's eyes. Calm, measured, the kind of calm that didn't ask for permission, the kind that didn't need to prove anything. "I'm fine," he said, voice even, almost quiet, but somehow cutting through the space more cleanly than the laughter had. The trainer raised an eyebrow, clearly not satisfied. "Look," he said, placing a hand lightly on the rack, not touching Marcus, but close enough to suggest control. "We've got rules here. Premium area. You can't just walk in and start throwing weight around." There it was. Not loud, not explicit, but clear. A line drawn, a boundary assumed. Somewhere behind them, a phone lifted slightly. Not recording yet, but ready. Waiting. Marcus glanced at it for half a second, then back to the mirror. He could feel the room watching now. Not everyone, but enough. Always enough. And still, he didn't move. Didn't argue. Didn't explain. Because this wasn't new. This wasn't even unexpected. This was a pattern. And patterns, Marcus had learned a long time ago, didn't break when you reacted. They broke when you let them reveal themselves completely. The trainer exhaled, a little sharper this time, stepping closer. "You hear me?" he pressed. "This isn't your level." Marcus let the silence sit for a beat longer than most people could tolerate. Then, slowly, he stepped back from the bar. Not in defeat, not in compliance, just stepping back. The trainer straightened slightly, misreading it instantly, the smirk returning like he'd just proven a point. Around them, the tension loosened a fraction, like the moment had already passed. But Marcus reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and looked down at the screen for a brief second. No ruse, no urgency, just precision. And in that quiet, almost invisible movement, something shifted, too subtle for most to notice, but enough to mark the beginning of something the room wasn't ready for. Marcus did not unlock the phone right away. His thumb hovered over the screen for a fraction of a second, not because he was unsure, but because he was precise. Around him, the rhythm of the Jim tried to return to normal, but it was off by just enough to feel wrong. A barbell dropped somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing louder than it should have. The trainer exhaled through his nose, already turning away as if the moment had resolved itself in his favor. "That is what I thought," he muttered, loud enough for the nearest few to hear. Marcus lifted his gaze again, catching the reflection of the room in the mirror. People pretending not to look. People very clearly looking. A young woman near the cable machine hesitated, her hands resting on the handle, her eyes flicking between Marcus and the trainer. She knew something was off. They always did. They just did not always say it. Marcus tapped once on his phone. The screen lit up. A name appeared at the top of a thread that had not been opened in weeks. He did not type a full message. He did not need to. 3 words. Clear. Direct. Enough. Then he slid the phone back into his pocket like nothing had happened. The trainer clapped his hands once, turning his attention to another client. "All right, let us get back to real work," he said, his tone shifting back to confident instruction, but the edge was still there, lingering. Marcus stepped away from the rack completely now, giving the illusion of compliance, but his posture did not shrink. It did not fold. If anything, it settled, like something locking into place beneath the surface. He walked slowly across the floor, not toward the exit, not toward the locker rooms, but toward the open space near the center where the lines of sight crossed. A few heads turned again. The same young woman from before finally spoke, her voice low but firm. "I saw him scan in," she said, not to Marcus, but to the trainer's back. The trainer paused, just for a beat, then looked over his shoulder with a half-smile that did not reach his eyes. "That does not mean he belongs in every section," he replied, brushing it off like it was nothing. The woman hesitated, then added, "His name was on the premium list." That got a little more attention. A man near the benches raised an eyebrow. Someone else shifted their stance. Small movements. Small cracks. The trainer turned fully now, his expression tightening just slightly. "Look," he said, lowering his voice again, trying to keep control of the room. "We have standards here. That is how we keep this place running right." Marcus stopped walking. Not abruptly, just stopped, right in the center of the floor. The overhead lights caught the stillness in his posture, the kind that did not ask for space but took it anyway. He did not turn around immediately. He let the trainer finish speaking. Let the words hang. Let the room absorb them. Then, slowly he turned. His eyes moved across the space, not searching, not scanning, just acknowledging. The people, the equipment, the environment. He had been here before. Not just today, twice last week, once the week before that. Each time quieter than the last. Each time watching, measuring, not the weights, not the machines, the people, the patterns, the tone, the way certain voices carried more authority than others without ever being questioned. The way assumptions formed before introductions. The way silence filled in gaps where respect should have been. The trainer took a step forward again, clearly unsettled by the shift he could not quite explain. "You need something?" he asked, the confidence forced now, stretched thinner than before. Marcus held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he spoke. "No," he said calmly. "I already got what I came for." The words did not sound like defeat. They did not sound like agreement. They sounded like a conclusion. The trainer frowned slightly, not understanding, but unwilling to admit it. "Good," he replied quickly. "Then maybe next time start in the right area." A couple of quiet laughs followed, weaker this time, less certain. The young woman near the cable machine did not laugh. Neither did the man by the benches. The room was shifting again, slowly, like pressure building behind a wall no one could see. Marcus reached into his pocket once more, this time not for his phone, but just to rest his hand there, grounding himself in the moment. He remembered another room. Another time. A polished floor, a different kind of uniform, a voice telling him he did not fit the image. He had walked out of that place back then. Not today. Today was different. Today he stayed. And as he stood there, quiet, composed, unmoved, the first ripple of something larger than the moment began to move. Beneath the surface, invisible to most, but inevitable all the same. The air in the gym did not return to normal. It tried, but something underneath it had already shifted too far. Conversations resumed in fragments, Weights moved again, machines hummed back to life. But there was a new awareness in the room, subtle and persistent, like everyone was waiting for something they could not quite name. Marcus remained where he stood, not in the way, not demanding attention, but impossible to ignore. The trainer turned back to his client, forcing energy into his voice. "All right, we're going to push past that last set," he said, clapping once more, louder this time, as if volume could restore control. But his eyes flicked back toward Marcus more often now, each glance quicker than the last. Across the room, the young woman who had spoken earlier stepped away from the cable machine and moved closer, not directly next to Marcus, but within earshot, within presence. She crossed her arms lightly, watching, no longer pretending she was just another person passing through. A man near the free weights lowered his dumbbells slowly, setting them down with more care than before, his attention now fully drawn into the tension that refused to dissolve. Another person near the treadmills pulled out a phone, this time clearly recording, the small red light reflecting faintly against the mirrored wall. The trainer noticed it. Of course he did. His jaw tightened for a fraction of a second before he forced a smile again. "We are not doing that here," he called out, gesturing vaguely toward the phone. "Let us keep this a professional space." But the word professional did not land the way he intended. Not anymore. Marcus watched all of it without moving. The reactions, the discomfort, the quiet realization spreading from one person to another. He had seen this phase before, too. The moment when people began to question not just what was happening, but why it felt wrong in the first place. It never started loud. It started like this. Small, uncertain, but growing. The trainer stepped away from his client now, walking back toward Marcus with a slower pace, more measured, as if recalculating. "Look," he said, lowering his voice again, trying to contain the situation instead of dominate it. "We can reset this. No need to make it bigger than it is." Marcus did not respond immediately. He let the words sit, let the shift in tone speak for itself. Just minutes ago, the same voice had carried certainty, authority, dismissal. Now it carried something else. Not quite apology, not quite concern, something closer to caution. "You already did," Marcus said finally, his voice calm, steady, unchanged. The trainer exhaled, glancing briefly around the room, aware now of how many people were listening. "That is not what I meant," he replied quickly. "I'm just saying we have guidelines. That is all." Marcus tilted his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the statement without accepting it. "Guidelines are consistent," he said. "What you did was selective." The words landed heavier than anything that had been said so far. Not loud, not aggressive, but precise. The kind of precision that left no room to hide behind generalities. A few people nearby exchanged looks. The man by the dumbbells shook his head faintly, almost to himself. The young woman took a step closer, her voice clearer now. "He is right," she said. The trainer turned toward her, irritation flashing across his face before he masked it again. "I appreciate the input," he said, the politeness thin, stretched over something sharper. "But I am handling this." "No," she replied, steady now. "You are not." That shifted the balance again. The room was no longer just observing. It was participating, quietly, carefully, but undeniably. Marcus did not look at her, but he heard it. Not support for him specifically, support for what was right. That was always the turning point. Not when people defended a person, but when they refused to defend the behavior. The trainer took another step back, creating distance, his posture no longer as firm as before. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But Marcus heard it, and this time, he did respond immediately. "No," he said, "this is it coming into focus." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. Not the trainer, not the clients, not even the people recording. It was as if the entire room had reached a point where pretending was no longer an option. And then, almost imperceptibly, Marcus's phone vibrated once in his pocket. He did not reach for it right away. He did not need to. He already knew what it meant. The process had started. Quietly, efficiently, exactly on time. The trainer, unaware of what had just been set in motion, ran a hand through his hair, forcing a short laugh that no one echoed. "Man, this is just a misunderstanding," he said, trying one last time to shrink the moment back down to something manageable. Marcus finally slipped his phone out again, glancing at the screen for less than a second before locking it and sliding it back into place. His expression did not change, but something behind it had already moved forward. "It stopped being that a while ago," he said. And this time, when he spoke, the room did not just hear him. It felt him. The shift was no longer subtle. It was inevitable. The silence did not break all at once. It stretched, thin and tight, like something about to snap, but holding just long enough to make everyone feel it. Marcus stood exactly where he had been, grounded, unshaken, while the rest of the room shifted around him in small, uncertain movements. The trainer glanced toward the front desk now, a quick look, almost instinctive, as if searching for reinforcement that had not yet arrived. That was when the door near the entrance opened again, and a man in a fitted blazer stepped inside, scanning the floor with the kind of urgency that did not belong in a place meant for routine. His eyes moved quickly, then stopped when they landed on Marcus. He walked forward without hesitation, weaving past machines and members who instinctively stepped aside without knowing why. The trainer noticed him halfway across the floor and straightened slightly, relief flickering across his face. "Hey, good timing," he called out, gesturing toward Marcus. "We have a situation here." The man in the blazer did not respond to him. Not yet. He kept walking until he was just a few feet away from Marcus, then stopped. For a brief moment, he said nothing, simply taking in the scene, the tension, the eyes watching from every corner. Then he gave a small, respectful nod. "Mr. Ellington," he said, his tone controlled but unmistakably formal. The name landed like a weight in the room. Not loud, not dramatic, but heavy enough to shift everything it touched. The trainer blinked, the confidence in his posture faltering for the first time in a way that could not be hidden. "You know him?" he asked, a slight edge creeping into his voice, trying to reclaim footing that was already slipping. The man in the blazer finally turned toward him, his expression neutral, but his eyes firm. "I do," he replied. "Do you?" That question did not come with volume. It did not need it. A few people in the room exchanged looks again, the pieces beginning to move into place in their minds. The young woman near Marcus exhaled slowly, as if she had been holding her breath through the entire exchange. The man by the dumbbells straightened up, his attention sharpening. The trainer let out a short laugh, but it did not carry the same certainty as before. "I mean, he is a member," he said quickly, gesturing vaguely. "But we have protocols." "I was just explaining." "You were explaining what you assumed," the man in the blazer interrupted, not raising his voice, but cutting through the explanation before it could finish. The trainer's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. For a moment, he had no words. Marcus had not moved. Not when the man arrived. Not when his name was spoken. Not even now. But his presence felt different. Not larger. Not louder. Just confirmed. The man in the blazer turned back to Marcus. "Everything is in motion," he said quietly, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was all. No questions. No hesitation. It was already understood. The trainer shifted his weight, discomfort now visible in the way he stood, the way his arms no longer knew where to settle. "Look, if there was some kind of misunderstanding," he started again, his tone changing rapidly, searching for a way to reframe what had already happened. Marcus finally turned fully toward him, meeting his eyes without urgency, without anger, just clarity. "There was," he said, "but not the kind you think." The room leaned into the moment, every sound now quieter, every movement slower, as if instinctively making space for what was unfolding. The man in the blazer glanced briefly at his watch, then back at Marcus. "It will not take long," he added. "They are already reviewing everything." The trainer frowned, confusion and concern mixing now in a way he could not mask. "Reviewing what?" he asked, the question sharper than he intended. Marcus held his gaze for one more steady second, then answered. "This," he said simply. The word hung in the air, and for the first time, The trainer looked around the room not as someone in control, but as someone being seen. Really seen. The phones that had been lifted earlier were still there. The eyes that had watched quietly were no longer neutral. The energy had shifted completely, not in volume, but in direction. The trainer took a small step back, barely noticeable, but enough to mark the change. "This is getting blown out of proportion," he said, but the conviction was gone. Marcus did not respond immediately. He let the moment breathe, let the weight of it settle where it needed to. Then he spoke, calm as ever. "No," he said, "it is finally being measured correctly." And as those words settled into the space, the room understood something without needing it explained. This was no longer about a single comment or a single moment. It was about everything that led to it. And for the first time since it began, the trainer had no control over where it would end. The word measured did not fade quickly. It lingered, settling into the walls, into the mirrors, into the quiet spaces between breaths. The trainer swallowed, his confidence now unraveling in real time, thread by thread, as the reality of the situation began to take shape around him. He looked at Marcus again, but this time the look was different. Less certain, less dismissive, more searching, as if he were trying to rewrite the last 10 minutes in his head and failing. "Okay," he said, forcing a short nod, try to regain control of something that was already gone. "Let's just slow this down. There is no need to escalate." The man in the blazer did not move, but his presence alone had shifted the balance of the entire room. He stood slightly to the side of Marcus now, not in front, not behind, but aligned like someone who understood exactly where he needed to be. "It was already escalated," he said calmly. "You just did not realize it." The trainer exhaled, running a hand across the back of his neck, the first clear sign of discomfort he could not hide. "I was doing my job," he replied, the words coming faster now, less controlled. "We have to make sure people are using equipment safely." That is all this was. Marcus listened without interrupting. He had heard versions of this before. Different words. Same structure. Justifications built on assumptions. Policies used as shields. "You did not check anything," the young woman said from nearby, her voice steady, no hesitation left. "You decided." The trainer turned toward her, frustration flashing again, but did not land the way it had earlier. "Not anymore. You are not part of this," he snapped, but even he could hear how hollow it sounded. Marcus shifted slightly, just enough to draw the focus back without raising his voice. "She is now," he said simply. The statement did not argue. It did not explain. It just placed her there, firmly, undeniably. The room absorbed it, accepted it. The trainer opened his mouth again, but the words stalled before they could form. And in that pause, something else surfaced. Memory. Not his. Marcus's. He could see it as clearly as if it were happening again. A smaller room. A cheaper gym. Fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. He had been younger then, barely 20, saving what little he could to afford a membership because he believed in discipline, in building something from nothing. He remembered walking up to the front desk, signing in, feeling like he belonged for the first time in a place like that. And then the look, the same look, followed by a quiet conversation between two staff members, followed by a question that sounded harmless on the surface. "Are you sure you were in the right place?" He had left that day without finishing his workout, not because he could not stay, because he understood what staying would cost him at that time. Respect had a price back then, and he had not had enough of it yet. But that moment had not disappeared. It had built something, something that stood here now, in this room, in this moment fully formed. Marcus blinked once, the memory folding back into the present without disrupting his composure. The trainer was still talking, trying to patch together a version of events that made him look reasonable. "Look, if I misread the situation, then fine," he said, raising his hand slightly, a gesture of partial surrender that still held onto pride. "We can fix it. No harm done." Marcus looked at him, really looked at him this time, not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity sharpened by years of understanding exactly how moments like this unfolded. "You think this started here?" he said quietly. The trainer hesitated. "It did," he replied, unsure now. Marcus shook his head, once slow, deliberate. "No," he said. This is just where you got caught. The words did not hit like an attack. They hit like truth. And truth did not need force to land. Around them, the room tightened again, the weight of the moment pressing down in a way that no one could ignore anymore. The man in the blazer glanced briefly toward the entrance, then back at Marcus. "They are almost here," he said under his breath. Marcus nodded once. He did not ask who. He did not need to. The trainer caught that exchange, confusion deepening into something closer to concern. "Who is coming?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Marcus did not answer right away. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make the question matter. Then he spoke. "The people who decide what happens next." And for the first time since this began, the trainer felt it fully. Not just discomfort, not just uncertainty. Consequence. Real, immediate, unavoidable consequence. And there was nothing left he could say to stop it. The word consequence did not echo out loud, but it settled into the room like gravity, pulling every glance, every breath, every thought downward into the same realization. The trainer stood still now, no longer pacing, no longer gesturing, his hands resting awkwardly at his sides, as if they no longer knew their purpose. The confidence he had carried minutes ago was gone, replaced by something quieter, something heavier. Around him, the gym no longer felt like his space. It felt like a stage he had stepped onto without knowing the script had already been written. Marcus remained composed, his posture unchanged, his expression steady, but there was a subtle shift in the air around him, the kind that did not come from movement, but from certainty. He was not waiting to see what would happen. He already knew. The man in the blazer took a small step back, creating just enough distance to give the moment room to unfold, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the entrance again, tracking something no one else could yet see. The trainer noticed. "That too. You are making this bigger than it needs to be," he said, his voice lower now, less confrontational, more cautious, like someone trying to negotiate terms in a situation he did not fully understand. Marcus looked at him, not with impatience, not with anger, but with a calm that made the words feel smaller than they were intended to be. "It was already big," he replied. "You just chose not to see it." The trainer shook his head slightly, as if rejecting the statement, but the movement lacked conviction. "No, this is just a misunderstanding between people," he insisted. "It happens. We move on." The young woman nearby stepped forward again, her presence no longer hesitant. "It keeps happening," she said, her voice clear enough to reach across the room. "That is the problem." A few heads nodded this time, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to shift the weight of the room even further. The trainer glanced around, seeing it now, really seeing it, the quiet alignment forming against him, not out of hostility, but out of recognition. He opened his mouth, then stopped. For a moment, he had nothing left to say that sounded convincing, even to himself. Marcus let the silence sit. He had learned long ago that silence, when used correctly, was not absence. It was pressure, and right now, it was doing exactly what it needed to do. His phone vibrated again, slightly longer this time. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, his movements smooth, unhurried. The screen lit up with a message that confirmed what had already been set in motion. He read it once, then locked the screen and slipped it back into place. No reaction, no visible change, but something had advanced. The trainer noticed the movement, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What is that?" he asked, the question coming out sharper than intended, a last attempt to regain some form of control. Marcus met his gaze for a brief moment. "Process," he said simply. The word was unfamiliar in this context, and that made it more unsettling than any direct answer could have been. The man in the blazer glanced at Marcus, then gave a small nod, confirming silently that everything was proceeding exactly as expected. At the far end of the gym, the front door opened again. This time, more than one person entered. Two individuals in professional attire, followed by another who carried a tablet, their presence immediately noticeable not because they were loud, but because they were purposeful. They did not hesitate. They did not look around in confusion. They walked directly toward Marcus. Conversations in the gym lowered again, almost instinctively, as people recognized that something beyond a simple disagreement was now unfolding. The trainer turned toward them, his posture stiffening, uncertainty now fully visible. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to reestablish authority, but the question sounded smaller than he intended. One of the individuals stopped a few feet away, their attention focused entirely on Marcus before shifting briefly to the trainer. "We are here regarding an incident," they said, their tone professional, neutral, but firm. The trainer forced a quick nod. "Right, yes, I was just explaining that this is being blown out of proportion," he replied, speaking faster now, as if speed could fill the gaps in his control. The individual did not respond to that. Instead, they turned back to Marcus. "We have everything we need to proceed," they said. Marcus nodded once. "Then proceed," he replied, his voice calm, decisive, leaving no room for interpretation. The trainer looked between them, confusion now fully giving way to realization. "Proceed with what?" he asked, his voice quieter, the question no longer demanding, but searching. Marcus held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, not to intimidate, not to dominate, but to make sure the answer landed exactly where it needed to. "With the outcome," he said, and in that moment, the room understood something without needing further explanation. This was no longer about what had happened. It was about what it would lead to, and that part had already begun. The word outcome did not need clarification, but it demanded understanding. And for the first time since this began, the trainer realized he was no longer part of the decision-making process. He was part of the result. The two individuals who had entered did not rush. They did not raise their voices. They simply stepped closer, one of them tapping on the tablet, pulling up information that had already been compiled, already verified, already aligned. The man in the blazer stood quietly to the side, watching as the final layer of the moment began to reveal itself. The trainer shifted again, his stance tightening, his eyes moving from Marcus to the tablet, then back again, trying to piece together what he had missed. "I think there has been some kind of confusion," he said, his voice measured now, controlled, but carrying a clear edge of concern. "I was just enforcing policy. That is literally my job." The individual holding the tablet looked up, meeting his gaze with a calm that mirrored Marcus's own. "We reviewed the footage," they said. "We also reviewed your prior reports and customer feedback." That sentence landed heavier than anything before it, not because it was loud, but because it reached beyond this moment. The trainer blinked, his expression tightening as he processed the implication. "And?" he asked, the single word carrying more tension than he intended. The response came without delay. "And this is consistent." The room absorbed that in silence. Not surprise, not shock, recognition. The young woman near Marcus lowered her arms slowly, her posture softening just slightly, not because the tension had disappeared, but because it had finally found direction. The man near the dumbbells exhaled quietly, shaking his head once, as if confirming something he had already suspected. Marcus stepped forward then, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to bring himself fully into the center of the moment. Every eye followed. Every sound faded. Even the hum of the machines seemed quieter now, as if the space itself understood what was about to be said. He looked directly at the trainer, holding his gaze without hostility, without emotion that could be misread, only clarity sharpened by experience. "You said I did not belong here," Marcus began, his voice even, controlled, but carrying weight in every word. The trainer opened his mouth, instinctively ready to respond, but Marcus continued before he could. "You questioned my presence, my access, and my ability, without checking a single fact." The words did not rush. They did not overlap. They landed one by one, each one closing a door behind it. The trainer's posture shifted again, his shoulders lowering slightly, his earlier certainty now completely gone. Marcus took one more small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make the moment unavoidable. "You laughed at me," he continued, not raising his voice, not accusing, simply stating, "in a space you thought you controlled." The room held its breath. Marcus paused, just long enough for the weight of that statement to settle, then delivered the line that changed everything. "But this space is not yours to control." The silence that followed was immediate and complete. Even the smallest movement stopped. The trainer stared at him, confusion now giving way to realization, the kind that arrives all at once and leaves no room for denial. Marcus did not look away. "I am Marcus Ellington," he said, his tone unchanged but now unmistakable. "Primary investor in this franchise group, and as of this morning, majority owner." The words did not need emphasis. They carried it on their own. The individual with the tablet turned the screen slightly, just enough for the trainer to see the confirmation displayed in clear, undeniable detail. The acquisition had already been processed. The ownership had already shifted. The authority he thought he had been standing on had already moved beneath his feet. The trainer's face lost its color, his mouth parting slightly as the reality settled in. "No," he said under his breath, not as denial, but as disbelief. Marcus remained steady, his gaze unwavering. "You told me I did not belong," he said, "in a place I already owned." The sentence did not echo. It did not need to. It landed fully, completely, leaving no space for interpretation. Around them, the room shifted again, but this time was not tension. It was release. A quiet, collective recognition that the truth had arrived, and it had arrived without noise, without chaos, without force. Just fact. The young woman took a small step forward, her eyes moving between Marcus and the trainer, her expression no longer uncertain. The man by the dumbbells nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement of the moment. The phones that had been recording remained steady, capturing not just what was happening, but what it meant. The trainer stood frozen, his earlier words now echoing back at him in a completely different context, each one heavier than before. And for the first time since he spoke them, he understood exactly what they had cost. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt final. The kind of silence that comes when something irreversible has already happened and everyone in the room knows it at the same time. The trainer did not move. He could not. His posture, once confident and grounded, now looked misplaced, like he was standing in the wrong role in a scene that had already moved past him. His eyes dropped briefly to the tablet, then back to Marcus, as if hoping the information might change if he looked again. It did not. The individual holding the tablet took a small step forward, their tone still calm, still professional, but now carrying the authority that had just been revealed. As of 10:42 this morning, they said, ownership transfer was completed and registered. All operational authority now reports to Mr. Ellington. The trainer swallowed, the words settling into him slower than the rest of the room, but heavier. "That does not make sense," he said quietly, not arguing, not challenging, just trying to understand how something so large could have happened without him knowing. The man in the blazer spoke for the first time since the reveal, his voice steady. "It does not need to make sense to you," he said. "It just needs to be true." The room shifted again, but this time it was not tension. It was alignment. The uncertainty that had filled the space earlier was gone, replaced by clarity. People were no longer watching to figure out what was happening. They were watching to see how it would end. Marcus did not step back. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to do either. "You said you were doing your job," he said, looking directly at the trainer. "So now we will review how that job was done." The words were not delivered with anger. They were delivered with precision. The individual with the tablet tapped the screen again, bringing up another set of information. "We have documented multiple prior complaints," they said, their voice carrying just enough to reach the surrounding area. "Patterns of selective enforcement, inconsistent application of access policies, repeated escalation without verification." Each phrase landed like a line drawn, clear and undeniable. The trainer's shoulders lowered further, his earlier resistance fading into something quieter, something closer to realization. "I was just trying to maintain standards," he said, but even he could hear how small that sounded now. Marcus held his gaze. "Standards are not personal," he replied. "What you did was." That was the moment it fully collapsed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. The trainer looked around the room again, but this time the eyes he met did not look away. They held steady, not hostile, not aggressive, just aware. The young woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward one more time, her voice softer now, but firm. "You could have just checked," she said. "That is all it would have taken." The trainer did not respond. He could not argue with that. The truth did not leave space for argument. The individual with the tablet glanced at Marcus, waiting. Marcus gave a slight nod. That was all the instruction needed. Effective immediately, the individual said, turning their attention back to the trainer. "You are being placed under administrative suspension pending full review of your conduct." The words were clear, direct, final in tone, even if the process itself would continue. The trainer closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, the weight of the moment settling fully into place. "I understand," he said quietly. It was the first time he had said something without trying to shape it, without trying to control how it sounded. Just acceptance. Around them, the room exhaled. Not loudly, not all at once, but collectively. The tension that had built from the first comment to this moment finally released, replaced by something steadier, something resolved. The man near the dumbbells picked up his weights again, but slower, more thoughtful. The young woman stepped back, her arms relaxing at her sides. The phones that had been recording lowered slightly, not because the moment was over, but because its meaning had already been captured. Marcus remained where he was, his presence unchanged, his expression calm. He did not look satisfied. He did not look triumphant. He looked certain. The man in the blazer stepped closer again, speaking quietly. "It is done," he said. Marcus shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "This is just the correction." The distinction mattered. And in that distinction, the room understood something deeper than the outcome itself. This was not about punishment. It was about accountability. It was about a line being drawn clearly enough that it could not be ignored again. The trainer stood there for a moment longer, then stepped back, not pushed, not forced, but moving on his own, the role he had held no longer fitting the space he stood in. And as he did, the gym did not erupt. It did not celebrate. It simply returned to itself, but not the same version as before. Something had changed. Something had been seen. And that could not be undone. The gym did not snap back to normal. It settled into something quieter, something more aware, like the air itself had learned something it would not forget. The machines resumed their rhythm, but slower, more deliberate. Conversations returned, but softer, more thoughtful. And at the center of it all, Marcus Ellington stood for one final moment, not as a figure of control, but as a presence that had shifted the standard of the space without raising his voice once. The trainer had already stepped away, no longer part of the scene, his earlier words now reduced to echoes that no longer held power. The staff who had arrived remained composed, finishing their documentation with the same efficiency they had brought in, their work not dramatic, not emotional, just precise. Because that was how real change happened. Not a noise. In process. The young woman who had spoken earlier hesitated, then stepped closer to Marcus, her voice quieter now, but steady. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. Marcus turned slightly toward her, acknowledging her presence with a small nod. "So am I," he replied. It was a simple exchange, but it carried weight, the kind that did not need elaboration. Around them, a few others lingered for a second, longer than necessary, not staring, not intruding, but recognizing that they had witnessed something that extended beyond a single interaction. The man by the dumbbells gave a slight nod of respect before returning to his set. Another person near the treadmills adjusted their pace, glancing over once more before focusing forward again. The room was moving on, but not forgetting. Marcus took a slow breath, then finally stepped away from the center of the floor. His movements were the same as when he had entered. Unhurried, controlled, intentional. He walked past the squat rack where it had all begun, the bar still resting exactly where he had left it, untouched, unchanged, like a marker of the moment that had started something much larger than itself. He paused there for just a second, not to reclaim it, not to prove anything, but to acknowledge the space as it now was, not as it had been minutes before. Then he kept walking. The man in the blazer fell in a step beside him, not leading, not following, simply aligned. "The rest will be handled," he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. "Make Sure it is, he replied. There was no need for further detail. The expectation was clear. Consistency. Accountability. Not just here, but everywhere this name extended. As they approached the exit, the front desk came into view, the same place where names were checked, where access was granted or questioned, where first impressions were often formed without words. Marcus slowed slightly, his eyes moving across the space, taking in the details with the same precision he had brought into the room from the beginning. Not judging, not reacting, just seeing, because that was where everything started. Not in the confrontation, in the assumption before it. He reached the door, his hand resting on the handle for a brief moment before pushing it open. Light from outside spilled in, cutting across the polished floor behind him, stretching into the space he was leaving. He stepped through without hesitation. The man in the blazer followed, the door closing behind them with a soft, final sound that did not echo, but settled. Outside, the world moved as it always did. Cars passed. People walked. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. But inside, something had changed permanently. Back on the gym floor, the young woman returned to her station, her movements more certain now. The man by the dumbbells completed his set, placing the weights down with care. The staff who remained adjusted their posture, their tone, their awareness, not because they were told to, but because they had seen what happened when those things were ignored. And in that quiet shift, the real outcome revealed itself. Not the suspension, not the ownership, not even the authority, but the standard that now existed where it had not before. Marcus did not look back as he walked down the sidewalk, his steps steady, his focus already forward. He had not come there to prove who he was. He had not needed to. He had come to see what the space would reveal when no one thought it mattered. And it had revealed everything. Because respect was never about who was watching. It was about how you acted when you thought no one important was. And as the distance between him and the building grew, one truth remained, clear and unshaken. He did not raise his voice. He raised the standard. And that was the kind of weight no one in that room would ever misjudge again.